The thunder cracked so loudly that Madeline Connors thought the sky itself was splitting open. But it wasn't the lightning that made her heart stop. It was the smell of smoke. She turned from the wagon's bench to see flames licking at the canvas cover, dancing wildly in the torrential downpour that should have made such a thing impossible. The kerosene lamp had tipped during the violent jostling, and now her entire life was ablaze behind her. Madeline screamed, yanking desperately on the reins, but her normally docile horses had been spooked by the storm, their eyes rolling white with panic as they charged forward through the muddy trail. The mountain pass to Panamint Valley was treacherous in fair weather. In this deluge, with visibility reduced to mere feet ahead, it was a death sentence. A massive figure on horseback emerged from the curtain of rain, materializing like a specter. The stranger pulled alongside her runaway wagon, his duster whipping in the wind as he matched pace with the terrified horses. "Jump!" he shouted over the storm's fury, extending his hand. "Your wagon's done for, my father's journals." Madeline cried, glancing back at the flames that were consuming everything she owned. Her late father's research years of geological surveys that would prove his theories about silver deposits in the Panamint Range was the only inheritance she had. Without those notes, her journey to California would be for nothing. The man's eyes, startlingly blue beneath the brim of his rain-soaked hat, met hers with a determination that momentarily steadied her racing heart. "I'll bring you out alive," he promised, his voice somehow carrying over the storm's fury. "And whatever's worth saving in there too, trust me." In that moment, with death chasing at her heels, Madeline had no choice but to place her faith in a stranger's hands. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The promise of silver had drawn countless souls westward, but for Madeline, it wasn't fortune she sought, it was vindication for her father's life's work. Isaac Blackwood had been tracking the Rawlins gang for 3 days when the storm hit, forcing him to abandon the pursuit and seek shelter. He'd never expected to find a woman alone on the mountain pass, much less one driving a wagon engulfed in flames. As a bounty hunter, he'd saved plenty of lives, but something about the fierce determination in this woman's eyes struck him differently. "My name is Isaac Barrett," he shouted as he maneuvered his horse closer. "I need you to trust me now. Let go of those reins and take my hand." Madeline hesitated only a moment longer before making her choice. With the wagon careening toward the edge of the trail, she released the leather straps and reached for the outstretched hand of the stranger. His grip was iron as he pulled her from the bench, swinging her onto his horse with a strength that belied the ease of the motion. "Hold tight," he commanded, settling her in front of him on the saddle. Madeline clutched the pommel as Isaac wheeled his horse around, racing alongside the runaway wagon. The flames had spread, engulfing most of the canvas cover despite the rain's best efforts to extinguish them. "Where?" he shouted in her ear. "Wooden trunk at the back," she replied, her heart in her throat as she watched her possessions, her very future, being consumed. Isaac nodded grimly, spurring his horse to greater speed. With one fluid motion that made Madeline gasp, he leapt from the saddle onto the back of the wagon, leaving her alone on the horse. The animal, remarkably, continued to pace the wagon as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Through the flames, she could see Isaac's silhouette moving with purposeful efficiency. He emerged moments later, a heavy trunk balanced on one shoulder, his duster singed and smoking. With a desperate leap, he returned to his horse, somehow maintaining his grip on both the trunk and the reins. "Hold this," he commanded, shifting the trunk into her arms as he reclaimed control of his mount. The weight nearly crushed the breath from Madeline's lungs, but she clung to it as though it were life itself. In a way, it was. Behind them, with a cracking of wood and a scream of metal, her wagon pitched sideways off the trail, tumbling down the ravine in a ball of fire that hissed against the rain. "We need shelter," Isaac shouted, guiding his horse away from the edge. "There's an abandoned line shack about a mile north." "Can you hold on that long?" Madeline nodded, unable to speak through the shock and the effort of holding the trunk. She leaned back against the solid wall of his chest, finding unexpected comfort in the presence of this stranger who had just risked his life for hers. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but as Isaac kicked open the door and carried her father's trunk inside, it seemed a palace to Madeline. The interior was dusty but dry, with an old iron stove in one corner and a narrow bunk built into the wall. Isaac moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making camp in hostile conditions. Within minutes, he had a fire burning in the stove, casting warm light throughout the single room. "Let me see your hands," he said, kneeling before her where she sat on a rickety chair. Madeline extended her palms, surprised to find them raw and blistered from the burning rains. She hadn't even felt the pain until now. Isaac produced a flask of whiskey and a clean handkerchief from his saddlebag. "This will sting," he warned before pouring a small amount over her wounds. Madeline bit her lip to keep from crying out, earning a look of respect from her rescuer. "Most folks would scream bloody murder," he commented as he gently wrapped her hands. "I'm not most folks," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I owe you my life, Mr. Barrett. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Isaac," he corrected, "and you can start by telling me what a woman is doing alone on Panamint Pass during the worst storm of the season." Madeline sighed, glancing at the trunk. "My name is Madeline Connors. I'm traveling to Panamint Valley to fulfill my father's dying wish. He was a geologist who believed there were untapped silver deposits in the Panamint Range. Everyone thought him a fool, but he mapped out his theories before consumption took him last winter." Isaac's eyes softened slightly. "So the trunk contains his research?" "Yes. Without it, I have nothing to show the mining company, no way to prove he was right." She straightened her shoulders. "I've come too far to turn back now." "Panamint's still a rough settlement," Isaac cautioned. "Not the sort of place for a woman alone." Madeline lifted her chin defiantly. "I've managed thus far, Mr. Barrett." "Isaac," he reminded her, "and nearly burning to death in a wagon isn't what I'd call managing." His tone was gruff, but a hint of amusement tugged at his lips. The fire crackled in the stove, throwing shadows across his face. In the warm light, Madeline took her first proper look at her rescuer. Isaac Barrett was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame hardened by years of riding. His face was weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he was in his early 30s. A scar traced the edge of his jaw, disappearing into dark stubble. His hair, damp from the rain, was the color of burnished copper. "What brings you to these parts?" she asked, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. "Tracking a gang that robbed the bank in Laramie," he answered, moving to unsaddle his horse. "I'm a bounty hunter." The simple statement explained much his confident handling of the crisis, the revolver holstered at his hip, the way his eyes constantly swept their surroundings. "The storms washed away any tracks," he continued, returning to the stove to hang his duster. "I'll have to pick up their trail once it passes." Madeline felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. "So you'll be continuing on your way tomorrow?" Isaac considered her for a long moment. A woman traveling alone to Panamint is asking for trouble. "I'll escort you there once the weather clears." "That's not necessary. It wasn't an offer," he interrupted firmly. "I pulled you from that wagon. I'm not about to let you die of exposure or worse on my conscience." Madeline opened her mouth to argue but was silenced by the rumble of her stomach. She realized she hadn't eaten since morning. Isaac's stern expression softened. "I've got some jerky and beans. Not much of a feast, but it'll keep you going." As he prepared their simple meal, Madeline found herself studying him. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made the howling storm outside seem less threatening. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a momentary respite from the weight of her solitude. They ate in companionable silence, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof filling the space between them. When they finished, Isaac insisted she take the narrow bunk while he spread his bedroll near the stove. "You need rest," he said, brooking no argument. "Tomorrow we'll see what can be salvaged from your wagon, if anything." Exhaustion settled over Madeline like a heavy blanket. As she stretched out on the bunk, she found herself watching Isaac through half-closed eyes. He sat before the stove, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements, the firelight glinting off the metal. "Thank you," she murmured, sleep already claiming her, "for saying you'd bring me out alive, and for keeping your word." Isaac looked up, surprise flickering across his features before they settled into something softer. "Get some sleep, Madeline. You're safe now." As consciousness faded, Madeline realized it was the first time in months she truly believed those words. Morning brought clarity in the form of pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world that sparkled with remnant raindrops. Madeline awoke to find Isaac already up and moving about quietly, preparing coffee over the stove. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice a low rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "How are your hands?" Madeline flexed her fingers, wincing at the stiffness. "They'll mend." He nodded, pouring her a cup of coffee in a dented tin mug. "We should check your wagon. See if anything survived." The reminder of her loss cast a shadow over the morning's peace. "Yes, I suppose we should." They rode together on Isaac's horse, Madeline once again seated before him, acutely aware of his presence at her back. The mountain pass revealed its treachery in daylight sheer drops and narrow trails that made her wonder how she'd navigated them at all in the storm. When they reached the spot where her wagon had gone over, Isaac dismounted and helped her down with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their strength. "Stay here," he instructed, approaching the edge cautiously. "I'm perfectly capable," Madeline began, "of falling to your death." He finished, raising an eyebrow. The ground still wet and unstable. Madeline relented, watching as he made his way down the slope with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. The wagon lay at the bottom, a blackened skeleton of its former self. Even from a distance, she could see there was little hope of salvaging anything. Isaac returned 20 minutes later, his expression grim but his hands full. "Found these," he said, holding out a singed Bible and a small wooden box. They were thrown clear before the worst of the fire. Madeline took the items with trembling hands. The Bible had been her mother's. The box contained her few pieces of jewelry, nothing valuable but irreplaceable all the same. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching them to her chest. Isaac nodded, his gaze softening. "The rest is gone." "But you have what matters most," he said, gesturing to the trunk they'd left secured at the line shack. "Yes," Madeline agreed, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "I still have my purpose." They returned to the shack to gather their belongings. As Madeline ran her fingers over her father's trunk, a realization struck her with paralyzing force. "I can't carry this to Panamint," she said, voicing the obvious problem. "And I have no money to purchase another wagon." Isaac paused in the act of saddling his horse. "How much farther to Panamint?" "About 60 miles. He considered this, his expression unreadable. "We can't carry the trunk on horseback, not with both of us riding." Madeline's heart sank. After all they'd been through, After Isaac had risked his life to save her father's work, would it all be for nothing? There's a trading post about 15 miles from here, Isaac continued, seemingly working through the problem aloud. Man named Haskell runs it. He might have a cart we could purchase, or at least a pack horse. Hope flickered in Madeline's chest. I told you, I have no money. Isaac finished tightening the saddle girth before turning to face her. I do, and the Rollins gang isn't going anywhere that I won't eventually find them. Why would you do that for me? Madeline asked, genuinely bewildered by the offer from a man who was still essentially a stranger. Isaac's gaze held her steadily. Because sometimes doing the right thing is reason enough. Madeline wasn't accustomed to kindness without condition. Her journey west had taught her harsh lessons about the nature of men's generosity. Yet something in Isaac's straightforward manner told her his offer came without hidden cost. I'll repay you, she promised. Once I've presented Father's research to the mining company in Panamint, I'll have means. Let's get there first, he said practically. Then we can settle accounts. They set off toward Haskell's trading post with the trunk secured as best they could behind Isaac's saddle. The trail was rugged but passable, winding through pine forests that filled the air with the scent of resin and damp earth. Madeline found herself relaxing into the rhythm of their travel, her body unconsciously adjusting to the movements of the horse beneath them. Isaac was a solid presence behind her, his arms reaching around to hold the reins in a way that felt protective rather than confining. How did you come to be a bounty hunter? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Isaac was quiet for so long that Madeline thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured as if carefully selecting his words. I fought for the Union. When the war ended, I found I couldn't go back to farming like my father wanted. I'd seen too much, done too much. He paused. Turns out the skills that keep you alive in war have applications in peace, too. Tracking down criminals, Madeline supplied. Yes, it gives purpose to abilities I might otherwise regret having. The simple honesty of his answer touched her. My father was also in the war. A surveyor for the army, that's where he developed his interest in geology. Is that so? Isaac's voice carried genuine interest. Where was he stationed? All over, but primarily in Tennessee. He used to tell me stories of the caves and rock formations he discovered while mapping routes for the troops. Madeline smiled at the memory. He said the war showed him the worst of humanity, but the land showed him the best of creation. Wise man, Isaac commented. I can see where you get your determination. The compliment warmed her, and Madeline found herself sharing more about her father, his theories, and their life together in Pennsylvania after her mother passed. Isaac listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an educated mind behind his rugged exterior. By the time they reached Haskell's trading post, Madeline realized she'd told Isaac more about herself than she'd shared with anyone in years. The ease of their conversation was unexpected but not unwelcome. The trading post was a sturdy log structure with a corral for livestock and several outbuildings. A grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard emerged as they approached, eyeing them suspiciously. Haskell, Isaac greeted with a nod of recognition. Need to buy a cart and a pack horse. Lady's wagon burned in the storm. Haskell's gaze shifted to Madeline, his expression sharpening with interest. That's so. You're a ways from anywhere proper, miss. I'm traveling to Panamint Valley, she replied, keeping her tone civil but cool. Panamint, Haskell chuckled. Nothing there but rocks and desperados. And silver, Isaac interjected smoothly, which is why Miss Connors is making the journey. Now about that cart. The negotiation that followed revealed another side of Isaac's shrewd, unbending when it mattered, but fair. Within an hour, They had acquired a small two-wheeled cart and a sturdy pack-horse to pull it, along with supplies to replace what Madeline had lost. As Isaac loaded her father's trunk into the cart, Haskell approached Madeline where she stood selecting replacement clothing from the trader's meager offerings. "Your man there," Haskell said in a low voice. "He's Isaac Barrett, ain't he? The bounty hunter." Madeline startled at both the assumption that Isaac was her man and the recognition. "Yes, he is." Haskell whistled low. "Word is he's tracking the Rawlins boys. Dangerous business. They left 3 men dead in Laramie." A chill ran through Madeline as she glanced toward Isaac, now securing the last of their supplies. She hadn't fully considered the danger of his profession until now. "He knows what he's doing," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Sure he does," Haskell agreed. "That's why he's still breathing when plenty of others who have gone after the Rawlins gang ain't. Just saying, miss, you picked yourself a dangerous traveling companion." "Mr. Barrett was kind enough to help me when I was in need," Madeline corrected firmly. "We're not together." Haskell's knowing smile suggested he didn't believe her, but he merely shrugged. "If you say so, miss. Just strange to see Barrett playing escort is all. Man usually rides alone." The trader's words lingered in Madeline's mind as they set off toward Panamint Valley. Isaac led the way on his horse, while she drove the small cart behind the placid pack-horse. The arrangement afforded her a new perspective literally, as she now watched his straight-backed figure ahead of her on the trail. Why had he abandoned his pursuit of the Rawlins gang to help her? Was it truly, as he claimed, simply the right thing to do? Or was there some other motivation she couldn't discern? As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Isaac guided them off the main trail to a small clearing beside a stream. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting with fluid grace. "Good water, sheltered from the wind." They fell into an efficient routine as if they'd been traveling together for months rather than a single day. Isaac tended to the horses while Madeline gathered wood for a fire. When he returned from the stream with a string of fresh-caught trout, she had coffee brewing and a bed of coals ready for cooking. "You're handy to have around camp," he commented, cleaning the fish with practiced movements. "My father and I often traveled for his surveys," Madeline explained. "He believed a woman should know how to fend for herself. Smart man." Isaac's approval was evident in his tone. As they ate the perfectly cooked fish, Madeline found herself studying him in the firelight, noting the way shadows played across the angles of his face. There was a gravity to him that spoke of experiences beyond his years, yet occasional glimpses of humor that suggested the weight hadn't crushed his spirit entirely. "Haskell recognized you," she said finally, deciding directness was the best approach. "He mentioned the Rawlins gang is dangerous. That they killed people in Laramie." Isaac's expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. "They did. Yet you've delayed pursuing them to help me reach Panamint." He set aside his plate, regarding her steadily across the fire. "The Rawlins brothers have been leaving a trail of bodies from Montana to Mexico for 3 years. Another week won't matter." "But it might," Madeline pressed. "They could be getting further away or hurting more people." Isaac's jaw tightened. "What would you have me do, Madeline? Leave you stranded with nothing but a trunk in the wilderness?" "No, of course not." She shook her head, frustrated by her inability to articulate her concern. "I just don't want to be the reason you fail to bring them to justice." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "This isn't about the Rawlins gang. This is about you feeling like a burden." Madeline looked away, his perception uncomfortably accurate. "Look at me," Isaac said, his voice gentler than she'd yet heard it. When she met his gaze, he continued, "I make my own choices. I chose to help you, and I don't regret it. The trail will still be there when we reach Panamint." "But why?" The question that had been haunting her finally escaped. Why help me at all? Isaac was silent for a long moment, stirring the fire with a stick. When I saw your wagon catch fire in that storm, he finally said, you didn't panic. You were trying to save what mattered to you, even if it cost you your life. That kind of courage. It's rare. He looked up, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've spent years hunting men who take what isn't theirs. Maybe I wanted just once to help someone protect what is rightfully theirs instead. The simple honesty of his answer struck Madeline speechless. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits perhaps, or the foundation of trust being laid stone by stone. The conversation turned to lighter topics as the evening progressed, but Madeline found herself more aware of Isaac than before the timbre of his laugh when she recounted a story from her childhood. The thoughtfulness with which he listened, the unexpected gentleness in his calloused hands as he helped her tend to a blister on her palm. When they finally settled for the night, Madeline on a bedroll near the fire and Isaac a respectful distance away, she found herself wondering what kind of man he had been before the war had changed him. And more disturbingly, what kind of woman she might become after her time with him. The following days established a rhythm to their journey. They traveled from dawn until late afternoon, making steady progress toward Panamint Valley. The landscape changed gradually, pine forests giving way to sagebrush plains that stretched toward distant mountains. They encountered few other travelers, though occasionally a stagecoach would thunder past, its passengers staring curiously at the odd pair, a bounty hunter and a woman in a modest but worn dress, leading a cart containing a single trunk. On the third night, they camped near an outcropping of red rocks that provided shelter from the increasing heat. As Madeline prepared their evening meal, Isaac returned from scouting with a troubled expression. "Riders," he said without preamble, "5 of them following our trail." Madeline's hands stilled over the cooking pot. "The Rawlins gang," Isaac shook his head, "can't be sure from this distance. Could be nothing prospectors or travelers, but they're following our exact path and that makes me cautious. What should we do?" He considered their options, eyes scanning their surroundings with tactical precision. "We'll move camp after dark, find a more defensible position. You think they mean us harm?" The possibility hadn't truly occurred to Madeline until now. "I think a woman traveling with a man known for hunting outlaws is a target," Isaac replied grimly. "Especially when that man has a price on his head with certain crowds." The revelation struck Madeline like a physical blow. "You have a bounty on you." Isaac's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. "The hunter becomes the hunted. Certain people don't appreciate my line of work." "You might have mentioned this earlier," Madeline said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. "Would it have changed your decision to travel with me?" Isaac challenged. Madeline wanted to say yes, that of course it would have, but the truth stopped her. After he'd saved her life, after the care he'd shown her, would she really have chosen differently? "We should eat quickly," she said instead, "before we lose all light." They packed up camp in tense silence, abandoning the fire while embers still glowed. Isaac led them on a circuitous route that doubled back on itself several times before finding a position among a cluster of massive boulders. The natural formation created a sheltered pocket accessible only from one direction, with clear lines of sight to the surrounding terrain. "We'll take watches," Isaac said as they settled in, his voice pitched low despite the distance between them and any potential pursuers. "I'll take first, wake you in 4 hours." "Isaac," Madeline whispered, catching his arm as he moved to take position at the entrance to their rocky shelter. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful." His expression softened in the moonlight. "You have nothing to apologize for." I should have been forthcoming about the risks. We'll face them together, she said, the words coming unbidden but feeling right nonetheless. Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. Get some rest, he murmured. Dawn's not far off. Madeline tried to sleep, but her mind raced with possibilities. Who were the riders following them? What would happen if they caught up? She'd never fired a gun, had no way to defend herself or Isaac if it came to violence. The realization of her helplessness in this wild country was sobering. She must have dozed despite her anxiety, for she woke with a start to Isaac's hand on her shoulder. They're gone, he said, his face showing relief mingled with lingering tension. Passed by our old camp, followed the false trail I left for a while, then turned back. Who do you think they were? Not sure. Isaac settled beside her, finally allowing himself to relax slightly. But they weren't tracking like professionals, probably not the Rawlins gang. That's comforting, I suppose, Madeline said, though the knowledge that they'd been followed at all left her unsettled. We should reach the eastern edge of Panamint Valley tomorrow, Isaac said, changing the subject. Another day after that to the settlement itself. Madeline nodded, surprised by the conflicting emotions the news evoked. Relief, certainly her journey's end was in sight, the fulfillment of her promise to her father within reach. But there was something else, a reluctance she hadn't anticipated. Once they reached Panamint, Isaac would continue his hunt and she would be alone again. "Will you come with me?" she asked impulsively. "To meet with the mining company, I mean. They might be more receptive if..." If what? If she had a man beside her. The thought galled her independent spirit, yet she knew it was the practical truth. A woman alone would struggle to be taken seriously in the business affairs of the West. "If you'd like," Isaac agreed, apparently understanding her unfinished thought. "I'd like to see this through, make sure your father's work gets the recognition it deserves." The simple acceptance warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the stars wheel overhead. When Madeline finally spoke again, it was to voice a question that had lingered since their first meeting. "What will you do, Isaac, after you catch the Rawlins gang, I mean?" He seemed surprised by the question, as if he'd never considered a future beyond his current pursuit. "I don't know," he admitted. "There's always another outlaw to track." "Is that what you want, to spend your life hunting men?" Isaac's gaze turned distant. "It's what I'm good at." "That wasn't my question," Madeline pressed gently. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "Sometimes I dream of land," he said slowly. "A place of my own, something to build instead of destroy." A self-deprecating smile crossed his features. "Foolish fantasy for a man like me." "Why foolish?" Madeline asked, moved by the glimpse into his private hopes. "The war's been over for 11 years. Men are making new starts all over the West." "Some men can't outrun their pasts," Isaac replied, a finality in his tone that discouraged further questions. Madeline wanted to argue, to tell him that whatever ghosts haunted him didn't define his future, but she held her tongue. They'd known each other less than a week. She had no right to push into wounds clearly still tender. Instead, she reached out hesitantly, placing her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "Thank you for protecting me tonight." Isaac looked down at their hands, then up at her face, surprise evident in his expression. For a heartbeat, something electric passed between them, a recognition of possibility perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of a connection neither had expected to form. Then he gently withdrew his hand, rising to his feet. "We should both get some sleep. I'll take first watch." Madeline nodded, wrapping her blanket around herself and trying to ignore the lingering warmth where their hands had touched. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered when Isaac Barrett had become more to her than simply a means of reaching Panamint safely, and what that might mean for them both. They broke camp at first light, eager to put distance between themselves and whoever had been following their trail. The day was clear, the temperature rising as they descended into the valley. By midday, heat shimmered over the landscape, distorting distant views into mirages that appeared and vanished with each passing moment. "We'll rest through the worst of the afternoon," Isaac decided as they reached a stand of cottonwoods beside a small spring. "Travel again in the evening when it's cooler." The shade was a blessing after hours of relentless sun. They watered the horses and refreshed their own canteens before settling against the trunks of the ancient trees. "Tell me about Panamint," Madeline requested, untying her bonnet and fanning herself with it. "What should I expect?" Isaac stretched out his long legs, crossing them at the ankle. "It's a mining town, so expect the usual saloons, brothels, a few merchants charging double what their goods are worth. The silver strike there is recent, so it hasn't settled into respectability yet. Is there somewhere suitable for a woman to stay?" "There's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, not fancy but clean and respectable." He glanced at her. "I know the sheriff there, Sam Tillman. Good man. He'll look out for you after I leave." "After I leave." The words brought a sharp pang that Madeline tried to ignore. "And the mining company?" "Sierra Silver, I believe Father called it." Isaac nodded. "They've got offices in town. The manager is a man named Henderson. Don't know him personally, but he has a reputation for being fair if shrewd." "I hope he'll see the value in Father's research," Madeline mused, running her fingers over the grass beside her. "The company that dismissed him in Pennsylvania certainly didn't." "What exactly did your father discover?" Isaac asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Madeline hesitated. She'd guarded her father's theories so carefully for so long, but Isaac had earned her trust a dozen times over. "He believed there's a second vein of silver in the Panamint Range," she explained. "Deeper than what's currently being mined, but potentially far richer. He developed a method of identifying silver deposits based on surrounding minerals and rock formations." Isaac whistled low. "That would be worth a fortune if he's right." "Yes," Madeline agreed. "Enough that I could establish myself properly, maybe even open a school." The dream she'd harbored since girlhood slipped out before she could reconsider. "A school?" Isaac's expression was one of pleasant surprise. "You're a teacher." "I was, before Father fell ill," Madeline admitted. "I taught at a small school in Philadelphia for 3 years. I loved it, but when Father needed care." She trailed off with a shrug. "Family comes first." "It always should," Isaac agreed softly, something in his tone suggesting personal knowledge of the principle. Madeline found herself wanting to ask about his family, but the peaceful expression that had settled over his features made her reluctant to potentially dispel it with difficult memories. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the dappled sunlight play across her face through the leaves overhead. The gentle sounds of the breeze through the cottonwoods and the distant call of a hawk lulled her into a state of relaxation she hadn't experienced in months. When she opened her eyes again, the quality of light had changed, the sun now lower in the sky. Isaac was no longer beside her. Alarmed, Madeline sat up quickly, scanning their small camp. She found him at the spring, kneeling with his back to her. He had removed his shirt and was using a bandana to wash, water glistening on his sun-bronzed skin. Madeline knew she should look away, but the sight held her transfixed. His back was a map of hard, experienced lean muscle developed through years of riding and tracking, but also marked with scars that told stories she could only imagine. A particularly vicious line traced from his left shoulder blade to his spine, the work of a knife, she guessed. Smaller, rounder scars might have been bullet wounds. As Isaac straightened and turned slightly to reach for his shirt, Madeline caught a glimpse of another scar on his chest, just over his heart. The puckered flesh suggested a serious wound that by all rights should have been fatal. She finally managed to avert her eyes, a blush heating her cheeks as she realized the impropriety of her observations. When she looked up again, Isaac had donned his shirt and was walking back toward their resting spot, water droplets still clinging to his hair. "Sleep well?" he asked, apparently unaware of her discomfort. "Yes, thank you," she managed, hoping her face didn't betray her thoughts. "Should we prepare to move on?" Isaac nodded, glancing at the western sky. "Another 3 hours of daylight. We should make good progress before nightfall." They packed up their small camp efficiently. As Madeline secured her father's trunk in the cart, she found herself wondering at the complexity of the man who had become her protector and companion. What battles had marked his body so thoroughly? What experiences had shaped the man who could be both deadly hunter and gentle guardian? And why did these questions suddenly matter so much to her? The road widened as they descended further into Panamint Valley, suggesting more frequent travel. By nightfall, they had reached what Isaac identified as the main trail into the settlement itself. "We'll camp here tonight," he decided, indicating a flat area near the trail. "Reach town by mid-morning tomorrow." As they prepared their evening meal, Madeline found herself growing increasingly quiet, her thoughts turning to what awaited her in Panamint. Would the mining company value her father's research? Would she find a place for herself in this rough frontier town? And what of Isaac? How quickly would he resume his hunt once he'd seen her safely established? "You're troubled," Isaac observed as they sat beside their small fire. "Having second thoughts about Panamint?" Madeline shook her head. "Not second thoughts, just uncertainty about what comes after." "After you present your father's research, after everything," she clarified. "After you leave." The admission cost her something in pride, but the approaching end of their journey made honesty seem more important than pretense. Isaac studied her across the flames, his expression unreadable. "You'll do well in Panamint," he said finally. "You have strength, Madeline, more than most men I've known." The compliment warmed her but didn't address the hollow feeling that had been growing in her chest since they'd sighted the valley. "Will you write?" she asked impulsively. "After you continue your hunt, just to let me know you're safe." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't identify. "Would you want that?" "Yes," Madeline answered simply. "I would." Isaac nodded slowly. "Then yes, I'll write." The promise settled between them, insufficient but better than nothing at all. They finished their meal in contemplative silence, each lost in private thoughts that seemed to circle around the other. As they prepared for sleep, Isaac paused in spreading his bedroll. "Madeline," he began, then hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Yes. In Panamint there will be men interested in a woman like you, especially once word gets out about your father's research." Madeline wasn't sure what she'd expected him to say, but it wasn't this. "I'm capable of handling unwanted attention, Isaac." "I know you are," he agreed quickly. "That's not what I meant was." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Just be careful who you trust," understanding dawned. "Are you concerned for my welfare, Mr. Barrett?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite the serious undertone. The question seemed to steady him. "Someone has to be," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'll be careful," Madeline promised, more moved by his concern than she cared to admit. "And I won't forget what you've done for me." "Nor I you," Isaac said softly, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. That night, Madeline dreamed of fire, not the terrifying flames that had consumed her wagon, but a warm, steady blaze that offered comfort and security. When she woke at dawn, the lingering impression of the dream left her with a sense of peace she hadn't expected on the eve of such an important day. Panamint appeared on the horizon as the morning mist burned away. A collection of wooden buildings nestled at the base of the towering mountain range that gave the valley its name. Even from a distance, Madeline could see it was a raw settlement lacking the established presence of older mining towns, but bustling with the energy of newfound prosperity. "Remember what I told you," Isaac cautioned as they approached the outskirts. "Keep your father's research close. Don't discuss it openly until we've met with Henderson." "I'm not naive," Madeline reminded him, though she appreciated his protective instinct. The town's single street widened to accommodate their arrival, curious glances following their progress. Madeline was acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance, the dust of the trail coating her dress and hair, despite her best efforts to maintain presentability. Isaac guided them directly to a modest two-story building, with a sign identifying it as Fletcher's boarding house. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting and approaching the door. Through the window, Madeline saw him speaking with an older woman whose stern countenance gradually softened as their conversation continued. After a few minutes, Isaac returned with the woman following. "Miss Connors, this is Mrs. Fletcher," he introduced. "She has a room available and has kindly agreed to help you refresh yourself before we meet with the mining company." "You're in luck, dear," Mrs. Fletcher said, her sharp eyes assessing Madeline with surprising kindness. "Most rooms are taken with the strike bringing in new folk daily, but I keep one aside for respectable women traveling alone. Heaven knows there are few enough of you." "Thank you," Madeline said sincerely, accepting Isaac's assistance in descending from the cart. "That's very kind." "Mr. Barrett explained your situation," the older woman continued, leading them inside. "Terrible about your wagon. Providence you weren't badly hurt. The boarding house was simple but immaculately clean, with polished floors and curtains that smelled of fresh soap." Mrs. Fletcher showed Madeline to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Baths down the hall," she explained. "I'll have hot water brought up straight away. There's a dress in the wardrobe that might suit, left behind by a schoolteacher who moved on to Sacramento last month. About your size, I'd wager." Before Madeline could process this unexpected generosity, the landlady had bustled out, leaving her alone in the first proper room she'd occupied since leaving Pennsylvania. Isaac appeared in the doorway, carrying her father's trunk. He set it carefully at the foot of the bed. "Mrs. Fletcher seems to have taken a shine to you," he observed with amusement. "I can't accept her charity," Madeline protested. "The dress, I mean." "It's not charity to help a fellow woman," came Mrs. Fletcher's voice as she returned with linens. "Besides, Abigail would want it put to good use rather than gathering dust." Madeline recognized the futility of arguing. "Then I'm most grateful." "I've arranged to meet Henderson at 2 o'clock, Isaac informed her. "That gives you time to rest and refresh yourself." "You'll join us for a proper meal first," Mrs. Fletcher insisted, addressing Isaac with the same no-nonsense tone she'd used with Madeline. "In the dining room at 1. You both look half-starved." When she'd gone again, Madeline couldn't help but laugh at the expression on Isaac's face, a mixture of respect and wariness that suggested he recognized a force of nature when he encountered one. "I'll see to the horses and cart," he said, moving toward the door. "And find Sheriff Tillman to let him know I'm in town." "Isaac," Madeline called as he reached the hallway. When he turned back, she continued, "Thank you for everything." His expression softened. "Rest, Madeline. I'll return at 1." The luxury of a hot bath after days on the trail was indescribable. Madeline soaked away the dust and tension of travel, allowing herself a rare moment of complete relaxation. Afterward, she found the promised dress in the wardrobe, a simple but well-made garment of deep blue cotton that fit her surprisingly well with only minor adjustments. By the time she descended to the dining room, Madeline felt transformed, not just physically refreshed, but mentally prepared for the crucial meeting ahead. She'd spent the morning reviewing her father's notes, ensuring she could explain his theories clearly to men who might be skeptical of a woman's understanding of geology. Isaac was waiting at a small table by the window, engaged in conversation with a man whose sheriff's badge caught the afternoon light. Both men rose as she approached, and Madeline didn't miss the momentary widening of Isaac's eyes as he took in her appearance. "Miss Connors," he greeted, his voice carrying a new formality that recognized their changed circumstances. "You look well." "Thank you," she replied, equally formal despite the warmth spreading through her at his evident appreciation. "This is Sheriff Sam Tillman," Isaac continued, gesturing to his companion. "An old friend and one of the few lawmen I trust without reservation." Sheriff Tillman was a stocky man in his 40s, with kind eyes that belied the weathered lines of his face. "Miss Connors, Isaac tells me you've had quite a journey." "That's one way to describe it," Madeline agreed with a smile as both men held her chair. Mrs. Fletcher appeared with a meal that surpassed anything Madeline had eaten since leaving civilization: roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her kitchen garden, and apple pie still warm from the oven. As they ate, Sheriff Tillman provided a brief history of Panamin's development. "Town's barely 2 years old," he explained. "First strike was made in '74, but it's the discovery last winter that's brought the real rush. Silver's rich, but it's also deep. Takes capital to extract it properly." "Which is where Sierra Silver comes in," Isaac added. "Exactly. They've got the equipment and men to work claims that would bankrupt independent miners." The sheriff glanced at Madeline. "Isaac mentioned your father was a geologist. His research could be valuable to the right people." "That's my hope," Madeline acknowledged, careful not to reveal too much despite the sheriff's apparently trustworthy nature. As they finished their meal, Isaac checked his pocket watch. "We should head to Henderson's office. It's nearly 2. The Sierra Silver Company occupied the most substantial building in Panamint, a 2-story structure with genuine glass windows, and a painted sign that spoke of permanent intentions in a town where most establishments still had the temporary feel of a boom camp. Henderson himself proved to be a surprise younger than Madeline had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with the sharp eyes of a businessman but none of the dismissive attitude she'd braced herself to encounter. "Miss Connors," he greeted, rising from behind his desk as Isaac made the introductions. "Mr. Barrett explained something of your situation. I understand you have research regarding potential silver deposits." "Yes, sir," Madeline confirmed, her hand resting protectively on her father's trunk, which Isaac had carried from the boarding house. "My father, Dr. Edward Connors, developed a method for identifying secondary veins based on mineral formations." Henderson's eyebrows rose with interest. "Dr. Connors, the geologist who published on metamorphic rock structures in the Geological Society Journal," Madeline blinked in surprise. "You're familiar with my father's work." "Indeed." Henderson gestured for them to be seated. "His paper on fault-line mineralogy was quite innovative." I wasn't aware he had turned his attention to silver deposits. The recognition of her father's academic contributions nearly brought tears to Madeline's eyes. After years of dismissal from mining companies in the East, to find appreciation for his work here, in this frontier outpost seemed almost miraculous. With renewed confidence, she opened the trunk and began explaining Edward Connors' theories, spreading maps and diagrams across Henderson's desk. Isaac remained a quiet, supportive presence at her side as she detailed the evidence her father had compiled suggesting a secondary, deeper vein of silver running beneath the current operations. Henderson listened with genuine attention, asking informed questions that demonstrated both his knowledge of geology and his respect for her understanding of the material. After nearly an hour of discussion, he sat back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Miss Connors, your father's research is remarkable. If his theories prove correct, and I believe they may, Sierra Silver stands to benefit enormously." He steepled his fingers, considering. "I would like to propose an arrangement. The company will fund exploratory drilling based on Dr. Connors' research. If silver is found as predicted, you would receive both a percentage of the proceeds and a consultant position with Sierra Silver, should you desire it." Madeline felt light-headed with relief and vindication. "That's more than fair, Mr. Henderson." "There's one condition," he added, his expression growing serious. "This information must remain confidential until we've secured the necessary claims. If word leaked out about a potential second vein, every prospector in 3 territories would descend on Panamint," Isaac finished for him. "Exactly, which would benefit no one, least of all the legitimate operations already established." Henderson turned back to Madeline. "Can I count on your discretion, Miss Connors?" "Of course," she assured him. "My interest is in seeing my father's work recognized, not in creating a frenzy." Henderson nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. I'll have contracts drawn up tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest you continue your arrangement at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. Sierra Silver will cover your expenses, of course." As they left the offices with a promise to return the following afternoon, Madeline could hardly contain her elation. "He believed in Father's work," she whispered to Isaac as they stepped onto the boardwalk. "After all this time, someone finally saw its value." Isaac's smile was genuine, his eyes warm with shared happiness. "I never doubted they would. Your father's research is sound, and you presented it brilliantly." The compliment brought a flush to Madeline's cheeks. "I couldn't have done it without you, Isaac. None of this would have been possible if you hadn't saved me and Father's trunk from that burning wagon." They stood for a moment in the late afternoon sunlight, the bustling activity of the mining town continuing around them, while something important and unspoken hung in the air between them. Finally, Isaac broke the silence. "We should get back to Mrs. Fletcher's. You must be exhausted after everything." Madeline wasn't tired at all, in fact. She felt more energized than she had in months, but she nodded agreement. As they walked the short distance back to the boarding house, she was acutely aware of Isaac's presence beside her, of the way other pedestrians automatically moved aside for his imposing figure, of the occasional tips of hats from men who clearly recognized and respected him. In the dining room, they found Sheriff Tillman waiting with news that changed everything. "The Rawlins gang was spotted 20 miles east of here yesterday," he informed Isaac without preamble. "Robbed a stagecoach carrying the monthly payroll for the Lucky Strike mine. Shot the driver and guard." Isaac's expression hardened instantly, the warmth Madeline had grown accustomed to vanishing behind the professional mask of the bounty hunter. "They're alive, driver is. Guard didn't make it." Tillman's voice was grim. "They're headed this way, according to the survivor. Probably planning to lie low in the mountains north of town." "I'll leave at first light," Isaac decided. "They'll be expecting pursuit from the east. If I circle around from the north, I might cut them off before they reach the high country." Madeline listened to the exchange with a growing sense of dread. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared herself for Isaac's departure, but the reality was still a shock, especially now, on the heels of her triumph with Henderson. "You'll need supplies," Tillman was saying. "I can have them ready by dawn." Appreciated. Isaac turned to Madeline, his expression softening slightly. "I'm sorry, I know the timing isn't ideal. You have a job to do," she said, striving to keep disappointment from her voice. "Men have died, I understand," and she did understand truly. How could she ask him to delay when innocent lives had been lost? What right did she have to claim his attention when his duty called so clearly? "You're in good hands here," Isaac assured her. "Henderson will honor his agreement, and Mrs. Fletcher will look after you until you're settled." "Of course." Madeline managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you'll write as you promised." Something complicated passed through Isaac's gaze. "Yes, when I can." Sheriff Tillman excused himself to arrange the supplies, leaving them alone in the dining room as the afternoon light began to fade. "Will you come back?" Madeline asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could consider its implications. "To Panamint, I mean, after you've caught them." Isaac hesitated, his eyes searching hers as if trying to decipher the real question beneath her words. "Would you want me to?" The echo of their earlier conversation by the campfire hung between them. Then, as now, Madeline's answer was simple and honest. "Yes." Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could see the individual flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "Then yes, Madeline, I'll come back." The promise settled between them, weighted with possibilities neither was ready to voice. For a moment, Madeline thought he might reach for her, might bridge the final distance that separated them. Instead, he took a deliberate step back, his expression regaining its composed control. "I should prepare for tomorrow," he said, his voice betraying nothing of whatever emotions had passed through his eyes moments before. "It will be an early start." "Of course," Madeline agreed, her own composure returning. "Will I see you before you leave?" "I'll say goodbye," he promised. "Get some rest, Madeline. You've earned it." As he turned to go, Madeline was struck by the irrational fear that this might be the last time she saw him, that, despite his promises, the dangerous pursuit ahead might claim him as it had claimed others who'd gone against the Rawlins gang. "Isaac," she called after him, waiting until he turned back to her. "Be careful." A smile touched his lips, genuine despite the gravity of his mission. "Always am." The night passed slowly for Madeline, sleep proving elusive despite her comfortable accommodations. She found herself replaying every moment of her journey with Isaac, from the terrifying instant when he'd appeared beside her burning wagon to the warmth in his eyes, as he'd promised to return to Panamint. When had he become more than just her rescuer? When had his welfare started to matter more than her own? Dawn was breaking when a soft knock at her door roused her from a fitful doze. She rose quickly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders before opening the door to find Isaac standing in the hallway, already dressed for travel. "I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye," he said, his voice low to avoid disturbing the other boarders. "I'm glad," Madeline replied, intensely aware of her disheveled appearance and the impropriety of receiving a man in her doorway while dressed in nightclothes, even with a shawl for modesty. Isaac seemed similarly aware of the breach in propriety, his gaze carefully maintained at eye level. "Henderson will take care of the arrangements we discussed. Tillman knows to keep an eye out for you." "I'll be fine," Madeline assured him, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. An awkward silence fell between them, so unlike the comfortable quiet they'd shared during their journey. There were things that needed saying, Madeline knew, but the words wouldn't come, or perhaps the courage to speak them was what she lacked. "I should go," Isaac said finally, The trail gets colder every hour. Yes, of course. Madeline forced a smile. Good luck, Isaac. I hope you find them quickly. He nodded, already turning to leave when Madeline did something she would never have imagined herself capable of just weeks earlier. She reached out, catching his arm, and when he turned back in surprise, she rose on her toes and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. Come back safely, she whispered. For a heartbeat, Isaac stood perfectly still, his expression one of stunned surprise. Then something shifted in his eyes, a decision made or a barrier broken, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. I will, he promised, his voice rougher than she'd heard it before. Then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hallway before Madeline could process what had just happened between them. She stood in the doorway long after he disappeared, her fingers pressed to her lips as if to preserve the memory of their brief contact. Only when Mrs. Fletcher appeared at the end of the hall with a knowing look did Madeline retreat back into her room, her mind awhirl with emotions she'd never expected to feel again after her father's death: hope, fear, and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. The days that followed established a new routine for Madeline. Each morning, she met with Henderson and his engineers, explaining aspects of her father's research as they planned the exploratory drilling. In the afternoons, she explored Panamint, becoming familiar with its rough-hewn character and the surprisingly diverse community that had sprung up around the Silver Strike. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be not just a landlady but a friend and guide to frontier life. Under her practical tutelage, Madeline learned to navigate the unwritten rules of a mining town, which establishments were respectable enough for a lady to enter, which men could be trusted with basic courtesy, which women were genuine friends rather than those seeking advantage through association with Sierra Silver's new consultant. A week after Isaac's departure, Henderson presented Madeline with the promised contracts. The terms were generous, more generous than she dared hope. In addition to a percentage of any silver extracted from the secondary vein, she would receive a monthly stipend as a geological consultant and a small house on company property, once construction was completed. Your father's work deserves this recognition, Henderson assured her as she signed the documents with hands that trembled slightly. And you've proven yourself more than capable of carrying it forward. That evening, Madeline wrote a letter to her father's old colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, sharing the news of her success and vindicating Edward Connors' theories at last. As she sealed the envelope, she realized she'd finally fulfilled her promise to her father, but found the achievement brought less satisfaction than expected without Isaac to share in her triumph. 2 weeks after Isaac's departure, the first drilling began based on her father's maps. The entire town seemed to hold its breath as the massive steam-powered equipment bored deep into the mountainside. 3 weeks after Isaac left, the drill struck silver exactly where Edward Connors had predicted it would be. The celebration in Panamint lasted 3 days, with Madeline finding herself suddenly the center of attention from townspeople who'd barely noticed her before. Henderson announced plans to name the new mine, the Connors Vein, in honor of her father's work. 4 weeks after Isaac rode north from Panamint, with no word of his whereabouts or success, Madeline began to fear the worst. No news is common in Barrett's line of work, Sheriff Tillman assured her when she finally worked up the courage to ask. He doesn't risk sending messages that might reveal his position. But surely after a month, Madeline began, unable to complete the thought. Tillman's expression was sympathetic but honest. The Rawlins gang has evaded capture for 3 years, Miss Connors. It was never going to be a simple task bringing them in. He promised he would write, Madeline said quietly, more to herself than to the sheriff. And he will, Tillman replied with more confidence than she felt. Barrett keeps his promises. It's one of the things that sets him apart in his profession. 6 weeks after their parting, a letter finally arrived, delivered by a trail-worn man who'd encountered Isaac in a remote mining camp to the north. The paper was creased and stained, the handwriting hurried but legible. Miss Connors, I trust this finds you well in Panamint. Circumstances have prevented earlier correspondence. The trail led further north than anticipated, but progress is being made. I heard word of your success with the drilling. Your father would be proud, as am I. I still intend to return when my business is concluded. Keep well until then. Yours. Isaac Barrett. The brevity of the note was disappointing after such a long silence, but Madeline read it a dozen times nonetheless, finding comfort in the confirmation that Isaac was alive and still intended to return to Panamint to her. The signature, yours, seemed to carry a weight beyond mere convention, though perhaps that was simply her own wishful thinking. Construction on her small house was completed in early autumn, a comfortable 2-room structure on a hillside overlooking the town. As she arranged her few possessions, her father's trunk, books purchased with her new income, simple but quality furnishings, Madeline found herself imagining Isaac's reaction to each item, wondering if he would approve of the practical layout, the small garden she'd started behind the kitchen. You've made a real home here, Mrs. Fletcher commented during a visit, her sharp eyes missing nothing, including the way Madeline had positioned a chair by the window with a clear view of the northern trail into town. It's beginning to feel that way, Madeline agreed, pouring tea for her friend. Mrs. Fletcher hesitated, then spoke with characteristic directness. You care for him, don't you? Barrett, I mean. Madeline nearly dropped the teapot. We traveled together for less than a week. It would be foolish to, sometimes a week is all it takes, the older woman interrupted gently. My Harold proposed after knowing me for 5 days. We had 30 good years together before pneumonia took him. Madeline set down the teapot carefully. Even if I did have feelings for Mr. Barrett, his life hardly allows for attachment. He follows dangerous men to dangerous places. That's who he is. Men can change, Mrs. Fletcher observed, accepting her cup with a knowing smile. Especially when given proper motivation. Before Madeline could formulate a response, a commotion outside drew their attention. Both women moved to the window, where they could see riders entering the town at a swift pace. That's Sheriff Tillman, Madeline noted, recognizing the lawman at the head of the group. And those must be prisoners. 3 men rode with their hands bound to their saddle horns, their expressions a mixture of defiance and defeat. Behind them came 2 more riders, one supporting what appeared to be an injured companion. As the group drew nearer to her hillside vantage point, Madeline's heart leapt into her throat. The injured rider was Isaac, his posture unnaturally stiff, a blood-stained bandage visible even from a distance wrapped around his left shoulder. He's hurt, she whispered, already moving toward the door. Mrs. Fletcher caught her arm. Wait, dear. Let them get the prisoners secured first. The last thing Tillman needs is a distraction. The wisdom of this counsel was evident, but it took all of Madeline's self-control to remain in her home while Isaac was escorted to the doctor's office on the main street. Only after the prisoners had been taken to the jailhouse did she make her way into town, her steps quickening despite her attempts at maintaining a dignified pace. Dr. Miller's office was a small building next to the apothecary. Madeline hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain of her welcome. What right did she have to intrude on Isaac's medical treatment? What claim could she make that would justify her presence? Before she could decide whether to knock or retreat, the door opened, and Sheriff Tillman emerged, looking weary but satisfied. "Miss Connors," he greeted, unsurprised by her presence. "I was just coming to find you." "How is he?" Madeline asked, abandoning pretense. "Stubborn as always," Tillman replied with a tired smile. "Took a bullet meant for one of my deputies during the arrest. Clean through the shoulder, but he's lost blood and has a fever starting." Will he? Madeline couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "Doc says he'll recover with proper rest and care," Tillman assured her. "But Barrett's already talking about leaving once the prisoners are transferred to the territorial court in Carson City." "That's absurd," Madeline protested. "If he has a fever, he shouldn't be traveling anywhere." "You're welcome to tell him that yourself," Tillman said, stepping aside to clear the doorway. "Maybe he'll listen to you." Madeline doubted that, but she entered the doctor's office nonetheless, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dr. Miller, a harried-looking man in his 50s, barely glanced up from washing his hands as she entered. "He's through there," he said, nodding toward a doorway at the back of the examination room. "Try to keep him calm. He's lost enough blood without getting his pulse racing." The small recovery room held a single bed, where Isaac lay with his eyes closed, his face unnaturally pale beneath his sun-darkened skin. His left shoulder was wrapped in clean bandages, his shirt and jacket draped over a nearby chair. For a moment, Madeline thought he was asleep until his eyes opened, focusing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Madeline," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than she'd feared. "You shouldn't be here." "Hello to you too," she replied, moving to stand beside the bed. "I heard you decided to stop a bullet with your shoulder." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Seemed like a good idea at the time." Madeline pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting down to bring herself to his eye level. "Sheriff Tillman says you caught the Rawlins gang." "All but one," Isaac confirmed. "The youngest brother wasn't with them. He's likely headed for Mexico by now." "So your hunt is over?" Madeline asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the hope rising in her chest. Isaac was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "This one is. And yet Tillman says you're planning to leave as soon as the prisoners are transferred." "There's always another hunt," Isaac said, though something in his tone lacked conviction. "Not when you have a bullet wound and a fever," Madeline countered firmly. "You need rest, Isaac." "Proper care." He started to shrug, then winced as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "Doc Miller's patched me up before, I'll manage." "You don't have to manage," Madeline said, frustration breaking through her composure. "You could stay here in Panamint." The words hung between them, carrying more meaning than their simple syllables suggested. Isaac's eyes widened slightly, searching her face as if looking for confirmation of what he'd heard or perhaps what he hoped she meant. "I have a house now," Madeline continued, her courage building. "On company land. It's small, but there's a spare room. You could recover there if you wanted." "Madeline," Isaac began, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "People would talk." She hadn't expected that objection. Since when does Isaac Barrett care what people say? "I don't," he admitted. "But you should. You're building a reputation here, a future. The company's geological consultant can't be seen taking in a wounded bounty hunter." "Mrs. Fletcher could serve as chaperone," Madeline suggested, unwilling to concede the point. "She's already half in love with you for saving me from the burning wagon." A real smile finally curved Isaac's lips. "Is that so? Don't let it go to your head," Madeline warned, relieved to see some color returning to his face. "The point is, you need somewhere to recover and I have room." "It's the practical solution." "Practical," Isaac repeated, something flickering in his eyes that suggested he was considering more than just the logistical arrangement. "And when I'm recovered, what then?" The question was direct in a way that both thrilled and terrified Madeline. This was the moment to be honest about her feelings, about what she hoped might develop between them. "That would depend," she said carefully, "on whether you found something worth staying for." Isaac's hand moved from the bed to cover hers where it rested on the chair arm. His touch was warm despite his condition, his fingers curling around hers with gentle pressure. "I think I have," he said quietly. "If she'll have me." Madeline's heart soared, but caution tempered her response. She might, if she knew he wasn't just passing through until the next hunt called him away. Isaac's expression grew serious. "I told you once I dreamed of land, a place to build something." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I meant it, Madeline. I'm tired of hunting men. Of living with death always a step away." "What would you do instead?" she asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Panamint needs a deputy," he replied. "Tillman offered me the position months ago. It would be steadier work, safer." A wry smile touched his lips. "Most days, at least." "And you would be content with that?" Madeline pressed, needing to be certain. "After the freedom of the trail." Isaac's gaze never wavered from hers. "Freedom's a hollow thing without purpose, Madeline, without connection." He paused, gathering courage for his next words. "Without love." The simple declaration stole Madeline's breath. "Isaac, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "We've barely spent time together. You hardly know me, but I want the chance to change that, to court you properly if you're willing." Madeline felt tears threatening, a joy so intense it was almost painful expanding in her chest. "I'm more than willing," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you to come back since the day you left." Relief and happiness transformed Isaac's features, making him look younger despite his pallor and exhaustion. "Then I'm staying. For good this time." Dr. Miller chose that moment to re-enter the room, clearing his throat pointedly at the sight of their clasped hands. "Miss Connors, my patient needs rest if he's to avoid complications." "Of course, doctor," Madeline agreed, reluctantly releasing Isaac's hand. "I was just offering Mr. Barrett accommodations during his recovery, with proper chaperoning, naturally." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he merely nodded. "Better than him trying to sleep in the jail or the saloon, I suppose, but he's not fit to be moved today. Tomorrow, perhaps, if the fever doesn't worsen." "I'll prepare everything," Madeline promised, rising from her chair. To Isaac, she added softly, "Rest now. I'll return in the morning." "I'll be waiting," he replied, his eyes already growing heavy with exhaustion and medication. "I'm done running, Madeline." As she left the doctor's office, Madeline felt as though she were floating rather than walking, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The future that had seemed so uncertain just hours before now stretched before her with newfound clarity, not just her professional success with her father's research, but the promise of personal happiness with a man whose courage and integrity had captured her heart in the midst of danger. The town of Panamint bustled around her, miners and merchants going about their business, unaware that her world had just fundamentally changed. Madeline paused on the boardwalk, gazing back toward her hillside house, imagining for the first time what it might become, not just a place to live, but a home. Their home. Mrs. Fletcher was waiting at the gate, her expression knowing. "Well, he's staying," Madeline said simply, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "He's taking the deputy position with Sheriff Tillman." "Is that all he's taking?" the older woman asked shrewdly. A blush heated Madeline's cheeks. "He's asked to court me properly, Mrs." Fletcher's face broke into a wide smile. "About time. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in a room together." "He's wounded," Madeline reminded her, sobering, "and running a fever. Dr. Miller says he can be moved tomorrow if his condition improves. I've offered him the spare room during his recovery." With me as chaperone, I presume? Mrs. Fletcher's tone made it clear she was already planning her role. If you wouldn't mind, Madeline confirmed, just until he's well enough to find more permanent arrangements. The older woman patted her hand. Of course, dear. Though if you think either of you is fooling anyone about where this is heading, you're not as clever as I gave you credit for. Madeline's blush deepened, but she couldn't deny the truth of the observation. From the moment Isaac had appeared beside her burning wagon, promising to bring her out alive, something fundamental had shifted in her world. That he felt the same connection, that he was willing to change the course of his life to explore its possibilities, still seemed miraculous. The following day dawned clear and cool, autumn firmly established in the mountain air. Madeline spent the morning preparing the spare room in her small house, arranging for extra pillows to support Isaac's injured shoulder and stocking the pantry with foods that would help restore his strength. Mrs. Fletcher arrived mid-morning with her valise, taking charge of the kitchen with cheerful efficiency. Sheriff Tillman will bring him up in the wagon around noon, she informed Madeline. He stopped by the boarding house on his way to the doctor's. Says Barrett's fever broke during the night. Relief washed over Madeline. Thank goodness. Dr. Miller was concerned about infection. Barrett's too stubborn to let a little bullet wound keep him down for long, Mrs. Fletcher observed with a chuckle. Especially now that he has something to recover for. The sheriff's wagon appeared on the hillside road precisely at noon, moving slowly to avoid jostling its passenger. Madeline resisted the urge to rush outside, maintaining a composed demeanor as Tillman helped Isaac down from the wagon and up the short path to her door. Isaac was pale but steady on his feet, his left arm secured in a sling, his right hand gripping Tillman's supportively offered forearm. His eyes found Madeline immediately, brightening with a warmth that belied his physical weakness. Miss Connors, he greeted formally, aware of the sheriff's presence. I appreciate your hospitality during my recovery. Mr. Barrett, she replied with equal formality, though a smile tugged at her lips. You're most welcome. Mrs. Fletcher has prepared the spare room for you. The transition was managed with minimal fuss. Tillman departed after extracting a promise from Isaac to follow the doctor's orders, and Mrs. Fletcher busied herself preparing a light meal suitable for an invalid. Left briefly alone with Isaac in the small sitting room, Madeline allowed herself to truly study him for the first time since his return. Despite his pallor and the lines of pain around his eyes, he looked more at peace than she had ever seen him. The constant vigilance that had marked his features during their journey to Panamint had eased, replaced by a quiet contentment that transformed his rugged face. You're staring, he observed, amusement coloring his voice. You look different, Madeline admitted. Less hunted. Isaac nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly. I feel different, like I've set down a burden I've been carrying since the war. The Rawlins gang, partly, he agreed, but more than that, the need to keep moving to avoid connection. His eyes held hers steadily, to outrun my own ghosts. Before Madeline could respond, Mrs. Fletcher returned with a tray, effectively ending their moment of privacy. The days that followed established a new routine, one of healing and growing closeness that unfolded under Mrs. Fletcher's benevolent but watchful eye. Isaac proved to be an unexpectedly good patient, following Dr. Miller's instructions without complaint and accepting Madeline's care with gratitude rather than the restlessness she had half expected. They spent long hours in conversation, learning the details of each other's lives that had gone unshared during their brief journey together. Madeline told him of her childhood in Philadelphia, her mother's early death, her years teaching at the small school while caring for her increasingly frail father. Isaac spoke of his family's farm in Ohio, his decision to enlist despite his father's objections, the horror of Shiloh and Vicksburg that had changed him forever. "I couldn't go back," he explained one evening as they sat before the fireplace, Mrs. Fletcher dozing discreetly in a corner chair. "Everything looked the same, the fields, the house, my parents, but I was different, broken in ways they couldn't understand." "So you went west," Madeline supplied softly. Isaac nodded. "Tried ranching in Kansas first, then scouting for the army. The bounty hunting started by accident, tracked down a man who'd stolen horses from the fort where I was stationed. The sheriff offered a reward, and I discovered I had a talent for finding people who didn't want to be found. And for staying alive while doing it," Madeline added, thinking of the scars she'd glimpsed that day by the spring. A rueful smile touched Isaac's lips. "Most of the time, though my luck nearly ran out with the Rawlins gang." Madeline's hand instinctively moved to his uninjured shoulder, resting there with gentle pressure. "I'm glad it didn't." Isaac covered her hand with his own, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "So am I," he murmured, "more than I can say." As October gave way to November, Isaac's strength returned steadily. Dr. Miller removed the sling, pronouncing himself satisfied with the healing, though he cautioned against strenuous activity for another few weeks. Sheriff Tillman visited regularly, discussing town business in a way that made it clear he already considered Isaac his deputy in all but official capacity. Mrs. Fletcher, having fulfilled her duty as chaperone during the critical period of Isaac's recovery, began making noises about returning to her boarding house. "You're well enough now that propriety doesn't demand my constant presence," she informed Isaac bluntly over breakfast one morning. "And I have a business to run." "We've imposed on your kindness too long," Isaac agreed, though his glance toward Madeline carried a question. Madeline understood the unspoken dilemma. With Mrs. Fletcher's departure, it would no longer be proper for Isaac to remain in her home, regardless of how well his courtship was progressing. Yet the thought of him leaving, of returning to the solitary existence they'd both known before finding each other, was painful to contemplate. "Perhaps it's time Mr. Barrett found more permanent accommodations in town," she suggested, striving for a practical tone despite the emotion behind her words. Isaac nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Sheriff Tillman mentioned a room available behind the jailhouse. It's small, but would serve until something better becomes available." The solution was sensible, appropriate, and utterly unsatisfying to them both. Madeline found herself counting the days they had left together in the small house that had briefly felt like a shared home, treasuring each moment even as she prepared herself for their necessary separation. On Mrs. Fletcher's final evening as chaperone, a knock at the door interrupted their quiet dinner. Sheriff Tillman stood on the threshold, his expression serious but not alarmed. "Evening, folks," he greeted. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a matter I thought Isaac should know about right away." "Come in, Sam," Isaac invited, rising from the table. "Is there trouble?" "Not exactly," Tillman replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Fletcher. "Got word from the territorial marshal. They've captured Jacob Rawlins, the brother who escaped." Isaac's posture straightened, his expression sharpening with interest. "Where?" "El Paso, trying to cross into Mexico just as you predicted." Tillman sipped his coffee. "Marshals offered you the job of transporting him back to Carson City for trial. Says no one knows the Rawlins gang better than you do." A heavy silence fell over the room. Madeline felt her heart sink, though she kept her expression neutral. Of course the authorities would want Isaac for this task. His reputation and experience made him the obvious choice. And of course he would accept, Completing the job he'd started was integral to his character. Isaac's gaze found hers across the room, his eyes communicating a silent apology and something else, a question, perhaps, or a request for understanding. "When would I need to leave?" he asked Tillman, though his eyes remained on Madeline. "That's just it," the sheriff replied. "Marshall doesn't need an answer until spring. Winter's setting in, and the passes will be snowbound within weeks. Jacob Rawlins isn't going anywhere until the weather clears." Relief flooded through Madeline so intensely that she had to steady herself against the back of her chair. Spring was months away, time for Isaac to heal completely, to establish himself in Panamint, to decide if this new life was truly what he wanted. Time for them to be certain of what they were building together. "I'll consider it," Isaac told Tillman, his tone non-committal. "Let the marshal know I'll give him my decision after the new year." After the sheriff departed, a thoughtful silence settled over the small house. Mrs. Fletcher, displaying her usual perceptiveness, excused herself to pack for her departure the following morning, leaving Isaac and Madeline alone in the sitting room. "You should take the marshal's offer," Madeline said finally, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's what you do. What you're best at." Isaac studied her for a long moment. "Is that what you want me to do?" "What I want doesn't matter," she replied, striving for selflessness despite the ache in her chest. "This is your decision." "What you want matters more than anything," Isaac countered, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Madeline, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, finding them clear and certain in a way that made her breath catch. "6 months ago, I would have accepted the marshal's offer without hesitation," he said quietly. "The hunt, the capture, it was all that gave my life purpose. But now," he reached for her hands, enfolding them in his larger ones, "now I have someone that matters more. If you want me to stay in Panamint to build the life we've talked about, then that's what I'll do." "And if I asked you to go," Madeline challenged gently, "to finish what you started with the Rawlins gang," Isaac's smile was tender, "then I'd go, but I'd come back to you, Madeline, always." The simple declaration, spoken without drama but with absolute conviction, dissolved the last of her doubts. This was a man who understood commitment, who had chosen her not out of convenience or passion alone, but with the same deliberate care he brought to all important decisions. "Stay," she whispered, turning her hands to lace her fingers with his. "Build something here, with me." His expression softened with such love that Madeline felt momentarily breathless. "I was hoping you'd say that." When Mrs. Fletcher departed the next morning, Isaac moved to the small room behind the jailhouse as planned. The separation was necessary for propriety's sake, but it did little to diminish the connection that had grown between them during his convalescence. Isaac officially accepted the position as Tillman's deputy, quickly earning the respect of Panamint citizens with his fair-minded approach to law enforcement and his unfailing courtesy to all, regardless of station. Madeline continued her work with Sierra Silver, her father's theories proving increasingly valuable as the company expanded its operations. They conducted their courtship in the open, attending church services together on Sundays and taking regular walks through town that ended with tea on Madeline's porch when weather permitted. The gossip that accompanied any new relationship in a small community quickly gave way to acceptance, then approval, as it became clear their intentions were honorable and their affection genuine. As Christmas approached, Isaac spent his free time working on a mysterious project that he refused to discuss, disappearing into the carpenter's shop for hours at a time. When Madeline questioned him, he merely smiled and promised she would understand soon enough. On Christmas Eve, following the community celebration at the newly constructed church, Isaac escorted Madeline home through a gentle snowfall that transformed Panamint into something magical, a far cry from the rough mining camp she'd first encountered months earlier. "I have something for you," he said as they reached her porch, producing a small wooden box from his coat pocket. "It's not much, but it's from you," Madeline interrupted, accepting the box with a smile. "That makes it precious already." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a delicately carved wooden pendant in the shape of a wagon wheel, suspended on a fine silver chain. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each tiny spoke perfectly formed, the whole piece polished to a warm glow. "Isaac," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful. Did you make this?" He nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "I'm not much of an artist, but I wanted to give you something meaningful, something that represented where we began." Understanding dawned as Madeline held the pendant to the light. "The wagon wheel. From when we met." "When I saw your wagon catch fire in that storm," Isaac confirmed, his voice growing serious, "I made you a promise to bring you out alive." "And you did," Madeline said softly, remembering the terror and relief of that night. "I'd like to make you another promise now," Isaac continued, taking the pendant from her fingers and gently placing the chain around her neck. The wooden wheel settled just below her collarbone, warm against her skin despite the winter chill. Then, to Madeline's astonishment, Isaac lowered himself to one knee in the fresh snow, taking her gloved hands in his. "Madeline Connors," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "When I pulled you from that burning wagon, I had no idea I was also saving my own future. You've shown me that there's more to life than the hunt, that building something is more satisfying than tracking destruction. That love is worth the risk of attachment." He reached into his pocket once more, producing a simple gold band set with a small diamond that caught the moonlight. "I'm asking you to build that life with me, to be my wife, my partner, my home. Will you marry me, Madeline?" Joy rose in her chest, expanding until she thought it might burst forth in laughter or tears or both. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, a promise to be properly placed later in private. When he rose to his feet, Madeline stepped into his embrace without hesitation, propriety forgotten in the perfection of the moment. Isaac's arms encircled her, strong and secure, as his lips found hers in a first kiss that held all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them for months. Madeline melted against him, returning the kiss with equal fervor, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Isaac pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Madeline. I think I have since I saw you fighting to save your father's legacy in that storm." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. "For keeping your promise to bring me out alive, and for every promise you've made since." The snow continued to fall gently around them, blanketing Panamint in pristine white that symbolized the fresh start they'd found together. From the burning wagon to this peaceful Christmas Eve, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way, a love story written in courage and trust, in shared purpose and growing devotion. As Isaac claimed her lips once more, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, the bounty hunter who had found something worth building, and the woman who had risked everything to honor her father's legacy, now creating a legacy of their own. Spring arrived in Panamint with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley and a flurry of wedding preparations in town. Madeline and Isaac had decided on an April ceremony, when the mountain passes would be clear, but before the summer heat made formal attire unbearable. The intervening months had been busy for them both. Isaac had written to the territorial marshal declining the escort job, recommending another bounty hunter for the task. His decision was met with disappointment but understanding, especially when he explained his reasons, his new position in Panamint and his upcoming marriage. With Mrs. Fletcher's help, Madeline had transformed her small house into a proper home for two, adding curtains and comfortable furnishings that blended her Eastern sensibilities with practical frontier necessities. Isaac, meanwhile, had surprised her by purchasing a small parcel of land adjacent to the Sierra Silver property, with plans to expand their homestead once they were married. For a garden, he explained when he showed her the deed, and maybe someday, for children. The mention of children, their children, had brought happy tears to Madeline's eyes, and a vision of a future richer than she dared imagine when she'd first set out from Pennsylvania, with nothing but her father's trunk and a desperate hope. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. The church was filled with the entire population of Panamint, from the wealthiest mine owners to the humblest workers, all come to witness the union of the town's deputy sheriff and its respected geological consultant. Sheriff Tillman stood as Isaac's best man, while Mrs. Fletcher had insisted on giving Madeline away, as Edward would have wanted. Madeline wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, with her mother's lace veil and the wooden wagon wheel pendant that never left her neck. Isaac, waiting at the altar in a new black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame, looked momentarily stunned when Madeline appeared at the church door. The expression of pure wonder and love on his face as she walked toward him was something Madeline knew she would treasure for the rest of her days. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken in voices that carried clearly through the hushed church. When Isaac placed the gold band on her finger properly this time, against her skin rather than over a glove, Madeline felt the final piece of her happiness slide into place. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple before him. "Mr. Barrett, you may kiss your bride." Isaac didn't hesitate, drawing Madeline into an embrace that was both respectful of their audience and unmistakably passionate in its promise. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they sealed their union with a kiss that spoke of the journey behind them and the lifetime ahead. The celebration that followed at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the town twice over. As darkness fell, Isaac led his new wife away from the festivities, helping her into the wagon he'd purchased specifically for this occasion, a sturdy, well-built vehicle with Barrett freshly painted on its side. "No chance of this one catching fire," he assured her with a smile as he took the reins, referring to the wooden pendant she wore. "I checked it thoroughly." "I trust you," Madeline replied simply, leaning against his shoulder as they drove toward their home on the hillside. Later, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window of the house that was now truly theirs together, Madeline lay in the circle of Isaac's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of a burning wagon in a mountain storm to the quiet joy of belonging to each other completely, their path had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. "What are you thinking?" Isaac murmured, his fingers trailing gently through her unbound hair. Madeline smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest just above the scar that marked where a bullet had nearly claimed him before they'd met. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most terrifying moments lead to the greatest blessings." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "The night we met." "Yes," she confirmed. "If my wagon hadn't caught fire in that storm, if you hadn't been there to save me." "I'd still have found you," Isaac said with quiet certainty. "Somehow, we were meant for each other, Madeline Barrett." The sound of her new name on his lips sent a thrill of happiness through her. "I believe you're right," she whispered, raising herself to look into his eyes. "And I believe we're only just beginning." Isaac's smile held all the promise of the future they would build together, a future born from danger but sustained by love, as enduring as the silver in the mountains, and as precious as the moments they would share through all the years to come. "Only beginning," he agreed, drawing her close once more. "And I intend to keep every promise I've ever made to you, starting with the first to bring you out alive." "You did more than that," Madeline murmured against his lips. "You brought me home." In the years that followed, as Panamint grew from rough mining camp to prosperous town, the story of the burning wagon and the bounty hunter's promise became something of a local legend. Children would pause outside the Barrett home, expanded now to accommodate a family of 5, with a garden that was the envy of the valley, hoping to glimpse the famous deputy sheriff who had once tracked the worst outlaws in the territory, or his equally respected wife, whose geological expertise had helped make the silver mines the most productive in Nevada. Sometimes, if they were fortunate, they might see Mrs. Barrett wearing the wooden wagon wheel pendant that never left her neck, a reminder, it was said, of the night a storm nearly claimed her life, and a brave man promised to bring her out alive. A promise kept, like all the others that followed, through a lifetime of love that had begun in fire and blossomed in the valley where silver ran deep and true, much like the bond between the man and woman who had found each other when they needed it most.